So good afternoon. Welcome to our panel on payments regulations, challenges and opportunities. So we have today on this panel three esteemed speakers on this topic. Firstly, on the extreme left, Wong Nai Seng. He leads regulatory strategy for Deloitte in Southeast Asia. We have in the middle Jakub Zazuski, who heads growth of Revolut in APAC. And last but not least, Sherry Goh, country manager for Luno. So as we all know, the Payment Services Act has been in the making for 3 years. So, we're having a chat with Nai Seng, as to when it all started. And I think it started in 2016, where this idea, of the new Payment Services Act was discussed. So finally, after sort of a few rounds of consultation and discussions with engaging the industry, the Act was finally passed in January 2019. Since then, consultation paper has been issued and further feedback received. I think the responses for these feedback are pending, and we expect this by the end of the year. And generally, sort of general industry and expectations is that the Act will be effective from early 2020. So maybe my first question to the panel will be, how are these payment regulations in Singapore and perhaps elsewhere in the region, similar regulations in the region, transforming the marketplace? Perhaps I can start with Jakub, since you have the mic.
Sure. So I think we're very happy with the upcoming Payment Services Act. We see it as a step in the right direction. We want to make sure that the standards are set for everyone equally, and that it's very clear what needs to be done in order to provide different types of payment services that are basically listed as an activity under the Payment Services Act. So we see a lot of similarities when it comes to AML, CTF, what we're also having under the EMR in the UK. We see a couple of differences as well when it comes to different ways of mitigating different types of risks that MAS has seen. But I think from our perspective, I think it makes a lot of sense, because what we really don't want to do is we don't want to operate in some sort of gray areas where we always have to go to great lawyers and get opinions about things that is not really clear. I think whenever it's set and done, and I think from MAS's perspective in Singapore, it was done, as you mentioned, through ways of different consultations. It was, if anyone had a very strong opinion about a particular topic, it was very easy to actually feed to the MAS. So we really appreciate that. I think we really appreciated also a series of events that MAS had when it comes to kind of showcasing in more detail about different payment activities under PSA, where also everyone could give feedback. So I think having that sense of community and having that sense to always be heard is something that we really appreciate. And as I said, I think it's from our perspective, it's just the beginning. Knowing that we're very happy that hopefully in January the Payment Services Act will come into force. But we think that there's still a couple of things that throughout the journey where different companies are going to be licensed. There'll be more and more things that are going to be coming, and then I'm sure that, as you know, MAS has left some doors open when it comes to interpretation, or when it comes to kind of seeing more data, seeing how the market behaves, and then adjusting on the way. So I think we really appreciate this kind of way of conducting or introducing new licenses, and as I said, I think it sets a good standard, and this is always why we were. We always wanted to let MAS know that, in our opinion, it is the MAS that sets the standard for the whole region. So that's why, knowing how it's going to be structured in Singapore, we hope that when it comes to the diligence in which the PSA has been put together, is going to be a great standard for other countries in the region. And that's why it's going to be easier for us, or easier for other companies to expand internationally, knowing that the requirements are pretty similar and highly influenced by what MAS has done with the PSA.
It's a really good point, right? The point about having clarity in regulations actually helps growth, right? Rather than, And perhaps, Sherry, do you think that will sort of change the marketplace to a great extent in the region?
I think in general, with any regulations, it puts the sector towards a very healthy development. I think we can all agree that in the past years, we see a lot of new business models coming out, new activities coming up. I think in general, innovation is great for consumer, but it's also putting consumer at more risk that they are not realizing as well. So I think with regulations, it it actually set the right guardrails to make sure that all this innovation takes place in a very healthy way, and make sure that all this innovation will ultimately benefit consumers without putting them at like unnecessary risk. Yeah.
Anything to add to the?
So I'd like to echo the views from Jakob and Sherry earlier. Really, the approach that MES has taken is one that's very risk-focused. So where it identifies that there could be particular risks, whether it's in terms of AML, CFT, in terms of technology risk or user protection, it has put in place some guardrails to address those risks. And then where I think they want to see more innovation, allow for more experimentation, particularly for the smaller companies with a smaller reach. They have allowed for greater flexibility. And therefore, I think that's possibly an approach that maybe some of the regulators in the region may also be considering taking up as well, as they look at sort of modernizing their regulatory approach. I think this issue of modernizing the regulations will be an ongoing process. As you said, all the new business models that are sprouting out because of technology, because of consumer demands and so forth, that will create more and more innovation and at a faster pace on an ongoing basis. So certainly a very exciting time for players like yourselves.
Yes, most certainly, and maybe to sum it up, basically, we think that look, regulations are great. A good, rigorous sort of process around engaging industry is fantastic, and of course, being flexible, right? Modernizing regulations help sort of different types of players come into the marketplace, right? So it allows for different players to come into the marketplace, which is very interesting. So I guess frequently, when we talk about this topic of regulations, albeit it's great for industry, it promotes, more different players, it ensures consistency, it protects the consumers. There's always this discussion around challenges, right? All good regulations, right? There always come challenges. So what are you, I guess, maybe Sherry, finding in terms of trying to implement the regulations? What are some of the key challenges that you are facing?
I think with any new regulatory introductions, there'll definitely be some kind of implementation challenges that we have to look at. And I will see them as teething issues that we have to overcome. So I think what is important for companies like us is to make sure that we do a very thorough review of our AML policies, KYC policies, just to make sure that we can actually meet the requirements that are set forth in different local markets. So I think a good thing that Luno as a company has done is that we have made sure that we voluntarily set good standards and high standards in terms of KYC, AML, and CFT. So I think there are some changes, but it's not too much. And I think these are things that we have to do and ought to do as responsible players in different local markets. But as a general point, I think the challenges that we see as a global company is that we do see a lack of unified approach in terms of how crypto regulations are being introduced. And I would also think that this is something natural for especially new regulations that are starting to form, especially in the area of crypto. So, different markets will have their own way to see how they want to regulate crypto. So for instance, Malaysia see crypto as securities, Indonesia see crypto as trading commodity, and Singapore, it depends, right? So all these differences are things that we have to look and analyze properly to make sure that we have the right requirements in place. But with all these differences, there will be some form of overheads and costs that will be incurred to make sure that we can make do with all these differences and make sure that we can actually function properly in the local markets. Yeah.
Jakob?
We don't see that many challenges. I think maybe one challenge that we see is the tight deadlines, knowing that there's still a lot of things that we hope that MAS is going to get back to everyone on, especially when it comes to consultations. So knowing that consultations were since, already good couple of months, and we have not heard back, and knowing that PSA is coming in January, which leaves us if something changes for what has already been set in the notices, it might not give us so much time, but we're already assuming that not much will change, and if it changes, what we're going to do is we're going to set a very high standard, so we already adjusted. Having said that, as I said, I think from our perspective, we see the changes are for the good, and this is something that also it's a good standard to have globally. So what we do is given Revolut is licensed across different jurisdictions, we take best standards from all of them and make sure that basically we create a Uber standard that makes sense, and it will also help us a lot when it comes to speaking with the regulators. And in case of doubt, we always are saying that we are having the kind of security of our clients always on the top of our priorities, and this is kind of reverse engineering from that, assuming if we're doing something, what are the particular risks around it and how are we mitigating these risks. And I think having this approach that it's something does not have to be written explicitly in order for us to kind of make sure that the way that we're operating is secure is something that is going to be allowing us also to create a case in case of doubt. But as I said, setting high standards and making sure that we reverse engineer from the client's security.
Do you find that if you are trying, and again, right, just sort of general question, when you are trying to set the highest standards, right, does that make you less competitive in the marketplace?
No, not at all. I think I think competitiveness should never come at the cost of compliance, and same for speed. I think from our perspective, it's something that is compliance first. And even though we're growing like crazy, I think it's not because we are sacrificing anything on the regulatory side. I think this is a given. This has to always come first. And even if we decided to do something that is not following this rule, it would come back, or it would bite back sooner or later. So what we're trying to do is, if we build solid fundamentals for our operations when it comes to product, when it comes to compliance, this is something that it's then going to help us scale faster.
Yeah, good points. So maybe leveraging on your last point about building good, strong sort of compliance or risk management allows you to scale faster, right? What do you think are other opportunities that regulations bring? I say.
Well, I think the regulations, by opening up the market, will certainly introduce then more players, potentially more competition as well. And certainly, I think for these players, they will have to think of new ways to attack the market, find niches for themselves in order to thrive. So these are areas of opportunity for the players as well as for consumers as well, right? How do they identify areas of value to consumers? What are the things that consumers value that players can deliver to them? So looking at payments not just as a thing in itself, as a service in itself, but actually leveraging on the payments data to think of new services that can be offered to the consumers. That may be one way to go. I think related to that of competition is also the issue of interoperability. As more and more competition takes place, there's the risk that the market may become fragmented. And then how do you address that challenge for consumers? Having, for instance, multiple QR codes facing them at the retail stand. So these, again, are opportunities for players to come together, to collaborate, and actually to develop solutions that actually meet the customers' needs, while at the same time they maintain their capabilities to compete in the market.
So, Sherry.
Yeah, I think to an earlier point that Jakub made was that I think with regulations, it puts us all on a level playing field. And it only makes sure that good and responsible players are playing in this field. I think as a result of that, it also makes the whole sector as a whole, we can actually sharpen our quality of our services and offerings to the consumers. And again, this actually benefits consumers ultimately. So that's one. And then I think next is also with the regulation, trust and credibility of this kind of services that we are offering will definitely be built. I mean, not just with consumers, but also with business stakeholders. So I think as a whole, this will actually propel the payment service providers towards a better, like a more progressive development. And I think it's really exciting to see what opportunities can really come when the act is in place.
like transforming the industry, right? Bringing it to the next level. I guess that's what it brings. So beyond Payment Services Act, so we spent a bit of time talking about the new Payment Services Act, but I guess we all know in the world of regulations, there's so many things that are going on, right? So, cyber security issues, data sharing, data portability, the digital bank licenses that we've talked about extensively this morning at the FinTech Festival, right? So from your perspective, within your businesses, what do you think are sort of the key, so maybe top 2 or 3 sort of threats on perhaps not, well, I call them threats, you may call them opportunities, arising from sort of key developments in the industry?
I can probably share something that I think it's an issue that is the crypto sector is grappling with, which is the implementation of the FedF requirements. So there's this requirement called the travel rules. Under that, what it requires is that for companies like us, we have to obtain and hold a list of required information about the virtual asset transfer that's taking place. Not just that, we also have to make sure that that set of information is actually shared securely with the counterparty at the receiving end of the transfer itself. So I think right now, players like us, we actually use blockchain monitoring tools that help us identify information of transfers and counterparties. But I think there still lies this technical obstacle as to how do we then actually share this information securely and lawfully with counterparties. I mean, knowing that there are data privacy acts and all these things. So I think that is something that still remains as a implementation challenge, not just in Singapore, because I mean, Singapore is also imposing that wire transfer requirements on players like us, but also globally. So what I understand is that the industry is working together to try to identify a complete solution to meet this wire transfer, these travel rules. But yeah, I think this is currently the main challenge that the sector is facing right now.
I think on our perspective, and this is something that has been around in the media for a lot of times, about the digital bank licensing regime in Singapore. So I think Revolut, the good thing about Revolut is that we've been always put in the first line of companies that could be potentially interested in obtaining digital bank licensing, knowing that we were quiet about our stance on our public opinion about the digital bank licensing. So this is a very hot topic in Singapore. It is good that MAS is opening to the banking licensing to new players. It will be very interesting to see who is actually going to get this license by the end of the year, knowing that the requirements are pretty strict, knowing that there are just a few licenses that are going to be given out. It's interesting from our perspective, knowing that we already got a bank license in Europe, and we know the pain of operationalizing a bank, and we know how much time it takes and effort and know-how, and knowing that MAS requires basically the bank operations to start 1 year after the license has been granted. So I think from our perspective, we know that a lot of regulation around the digital bank licenses are going to be also influenced on our operations in Singapore to set the highest standard. I think it's going to be interesting to see how this changes the whole landscape in Singapore, knowing that Singapore is pretty okay compared to other countries when it comes to digital banking. It's something that I think we hope that it's going to again open discussion if MAS sees initial applicants having a very high level of services that they want to offer, plus covering a particular niche in the market that has not been served, that maybe MAS opens it to more than 2 full retail and 3 wholesale licenses. Whenever we see that this is actually something that is adding a lot of benefits to the Singapore society. Knowing that it's just another mean of making the whole market more competitive. From our perspective, it's as I said, we see it maybe not as an opportunity, but this is something that we can get influenced a lot by, seeing how it looks in Europe, seeing how UK, the e-money regulation, has recently put on its head the whole banking system, kind of maybe pushing banks to start being more innovative. Very interested to see how digital bank licensing will influence the biggest banks in Singapore on making sure that right now it's not only the usual suspects that are going after the clients in Singapore in order to serve them on a day-to-day basis, but then we'll have more and more big players with very deep pockets because of the capital requirements, and knowing what are the type, or looking at Hong Kong and seeing what are the type of companies that are going after this kind of licenses will be very interesting to see how this will change the landscape in Singapore.
Do you think it will help, I guess, as you sort of enter into, you've recently launched in Singapore and, sort of expanding. Do you think this helps you as you try to expand, or do you think it
helps us? It helps us. It helps us for a couple of reasons. First of all, it helps us a lot on the PR side, knowing that everyone's talking about us going after this license. If it's not us, everyone thinks we're going to partner with someone to go after this license. And then, even though we're quiet, we see that all the guys that are listed in the media are contacting us to partner with us, and we're feeling like the pretty girl in town, getting approached by everyone. So it helps us a lot on the PR side. When it comes to from a consumer perspective, it will help me as a person who lives in Singapore to benefit from a better experience when it comes to financial services. More competition means better service at a lower price. And there should not be a place in 21st century for any monopolies. So that's why we see it as a step in the right direction, that it's going to be opening up to more players that have maybe being a little bit more digitally focused, having leaner cost structure that allows them to basically then offer services for at a fraction of cost and being digital first. So from consumer point of view, helps us a lot. From a financial institution perspective, helps us also from a perspective that we cannot change everything. We cannot be the only guys that are coming in and they're trying to share their views, share their experiences, feedback to the regulator. We want more people that are involved in the community of fintech that are going to be then helping shape it in the best shape or form. As I said, the rules are set. Let's make the rules best for everyone. And from our perspective, we're very happy that because it means that we're in the right sector, and we're very happy to make sure that there are other companies also that are going to be fighting similar problems, and that can help us as well. So
bigger voice, right?
So it helps us on all these three sides, and as I said, it will influence also a lot of decisions that are happening right now around in the region. Hopefully other regulators are going to get influenced by the right things in the digital bank licensing. But as I said, I think it's definitely a step in the right direction.
Great. And then maybe lastly, Nai Singh, I guess as a former regulator and now sort of sitting on the other side, advising financial institutions, and how do you see all sort of these different developments, right? Take your choice, right? Impacting the industry and your personal views.
I certainly agree with Jakob that the digital bank license creates a broader community of players in the market with different perspectives. And these different perspectives actually are important to generate the kind of new ideas, new thinking in the industry in order to better address consumer needs. And who knows, I mean, there will be opportunities as well for partnering. So as Jakob mentioned as well, right, they are also looking for players who are able to provide new capabilities, new products that the consumers need. So I think certainly it looks like a very interesting time for payment players, and as well as other financial institutions as well, who can have opportunities to partner with these digital banks and offer their services to consumers in fresh new ways. That's one. I think the other topic or development I'm quite interested in is this issue of data portability, and what does it mean for financial institutions? Obviously, I think an immediate challenge, if it ever comes into force, is financial institutions will have to think of ways to store their data, to actually make that data available, right, so that it can be portable to other players. That will be a major challenge. I think that there are challenges as the European financial institutions are dealing with it under PSD2 and open banking requirements. But going beyond that, what does it mean for a player now? So owning the data is no longer a comparative advantage because everyone can have that data access eventually. So then it becomes a matter of how quickly you can turn that data into insights that you can then use to better serve your consumers. What kind of capabilities are you able to draw out of those data, and whether it will actually create a situation where you have these large utilities that store data from various financial institutions, and then financial institutions are then in the process or in the business of developing algorithms and capabilities to draw insights from that data. Right? That's one. And then how do you assure consumers that you are using that data in the right way? That you're not abusing the data, you are transparent and fair in your use of that data as well.
I think that's certainly, I guess, from a consumer point of view, right? So data portability, greater access to data, and then there's a point around just this use of data, right? With this very topical now, ethical use of data, how do you set in the appropriate governance processes in place, right? So certainly, thank you so much, so the speakers, for panelists, for sort of sharing your thoughts. It is indeed a very exciting time for all of us. Having been to FinTech Festival in the last few editions, I can certainly see, it is a momentum, right? It's almost like a movement, and such discussions are, indeed very interesting. So thank you very much.